My ex said you'll always be just a waitress. Then he saw my restaurant on Gordon Ramsay's show, What If You Could Prove Everyone Wrong by Building Something from Nothing? Hey, my name is Catherine White. I never thought a single sentence could unravel me so completely, especially not in front of a room full of people I thought I knew. You'll always be just a waitress, Catherine, he said, his voice dripping with condescension, a smirk curling his lips as if he'd just won some unspoken battle. My ex, Ethan, stood there in the dimly lit restaurant where I worked, his words slicing through the chatter of the dinner crowd like a knife. I froze, my tray of empty wine glasses trembling in my hands, the weight of his judgment pinning me to the spot. The worst part, the way my sister, Lily, laughed, a sharp, betraying sound that echoed in my chest long after the night ended. I was 28, still working shifts at the Rusty Anchor, a mid-tier seafood joint on the edge of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was my routine, my small corner of control in a life that often felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I'd been a waitress since I was 18, scraping by, dreaming of something bigger but never quite knowing how to reach it. Ethan knew that. He'd known it when we dated for 2 years, when he'd promised me a future, when he'd whispered that he believed in me. But that night, as he stood there with Lily and a group of their new, polished friends, he tore that belief to shreds. His words weren't just an insult. They were a declaration that I'd never be more than what he saw in that moment, a woman in a stained apron, invisible to the world that mattered to him. The humiliation burned, but it was Lily's laughter that cut the deepest. My little sister, the one I'd protected through our chaotic childhood, the one I'd shared every secret with, she stood there, her eyes glinting with something I didn't recognize, amusement, cruelty, I couldn't tell. All I knew was that her laughter made me feel small, like I was shrinking into the cracked linoleum floor. I wanted to scream, to throw the tray at them, to demand why she'd turned on me like that. But I didn't. I just stood there, silent, the weight of their gazes pressing me into nothingness. As the night wore on, I moved through my tables on autopilot, refilling water glasses, forcing smiles, pretending I hadn't just been gutted in front of strangers. But inside, something was shifting. Each time I caught my reflection in the restaurant's foggy windows, dark hair pulled back, tired eyes, that damn apron, I felt a question clawing its way to the surface. Was this it? Was I destined to stay here, letting Ethan's words and Lily's betrayal define me? Or could I choose something different, something bigger? I didn't have the answers that night. All I had was the sting of their words and the weight of a choice I wasn't sure I was brave enough to make. But as I wiped down the last table, the restaurant quieting around me, one thing was clear: my life would never be the same again. The question lingered, heavy and unresolved: would I stay silent, or would I finally take control of my own story? The days after Ethan's words and Lily's laughter felt like walking through fog, everything blurred, heavy, and disorienting. I'd always thought betrayal was a loud, singular event, like a glass shattering on the floor. But as I replayed that night at the Rusty Anchor, I realized it wasn't just that moment that had broken something in me. It was the quieter betrayals. The ones I'd buried so deep I'd almost convinced myself they didn't exist. That had left the deepest scars. I kept going to work, tying on my apron, smiling at customers. But my mind was elsewhere, sifting through memories I'd tried to forget. Like the time Lily forgot to invite me to her college graduation party, claiming it was an oversight, even though I'd taken extra shifts to help pay her tuition. Or the way Ethan used to dismiss my dreams of opening my own restaurant, chuckling as if it was a child's fantasy, saying, "Catherine, you're good at serving people. Why mess with that?" I'd laughed it off then, told myself he was just being practical. But now, those moments felt like tiny cuts, each one bleeding a little more of my confidence away. Growing up, it was always Lily and me against the world. Our mom was a ghost, in and out of our lives with whichever boyfriend she was chasing. And our dad was long gone by the time I was 10. I was the one who made sure Lily had dinner, got her to school, patched her up when she fell. I didn't mind. She was my sister, my responsibility. But somewhere along the way, I'd started to disappear into that role. By the time I was in my 20s, working at the Rusty Anchor, I was so used to putting others first that I didn't even notice how little space I'd left for myself. Lily's betrayal that night wasn't just about her laughter. It was the realization that she'd been pulling away for years, reshaping herself to fit into Ethan's world of shiny new friends and big ambitions. She'd started calling me Kath instead of Kathy, like she was distancing herself from the sister who still smelled of fried fish and dish soap. And I'd let it happen. brushing off the hurt, telling myself it was just her growing up. But that laugh, it was proof she'd crossed a line I couldn't ignore. Each night after my shift, I'd sit in my tiny apartment, the hum of the fridge filling the silence, and think about those moments. The way Ethan's smirk had made me feel like nothing. The way Lily's eyes had gleamed with something that wasn't love. I'd always thought I was strong, the one who held it all together, but now I wasn't so sure. Those hidden betrayals had carved out pieces of me, leaving wounds I wasn't sure I could heal. As I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, I kept asking myself, could I confront these scars? Or would I keep burying them, letting them fester until there was nothing left of me? The question hung there, heavy and unanswered, pulling me toward a reckoning I wasn't sure I was ready for. The fog of that night at the Rusty Anchor didn't lift easily. Ethan's words, "You'll always be just a waitress," and Lily's sharp, betraying laugh clung to me like damp clothes, heavy and impossible to shake. But somewhere in the haze, a spark flickered. It was small at first, barely noticeable amid the ache of humiliation and the weight of old scars. I was tired of shrinking, tired of swallowing my hurt, tired of letting their voices define me. For the first time in years, I felt something new, a quiet, stubborn resolve to take back my story. I was wiping down tables after another long shift. The restaurant empty except for the hum of the neon sign outside, when it hit me. I didn't have to stay here, stuck in this cycle of serving others while my own dreams gathered dust. I'd spent a decade at the Rusty Anchor, pouring coffee, balancing trays, and smiling through exhaustion, all while telling myself someday I'd do more. But someday wasn't coming unless I made it happen. That night, as I locked up and stepped into the chilly air, I made a decision. I was done being invisible. I was done letting Ethan's smirk, or Lily's laugh, anyone else's judgment write the ending of my story. It wasn't a grand epiphany, no swelling music or sudden clarity. It was messy, raw, like waking up from a long sleep and realizing you've been dreaming someone else's life. I started small, scribbling ideas in a notebook I kept under my bed. I'd always loved cooking, nothing fancy, just the kind of food that warmed you from the inside out. I'd spent years tweaking recipes in my tiny apartment kitchen, experimenting with spices, dreaming of a place where people could gather, eat, and feel like they belonged. A restaurant of my own. It had always been a fantasy, something Ethan had laughed off, something I'd let myself believe was too big for me. But now, it felt like the only thing worth chasing. The decision to act wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about proving something to myself. I started researching late nights on my ancient laptop, reading about small business loans, food permits, and local suppliers. I sketched out menus, jotted down names for a place that didn't exist yet, Catherine's Table, White's Kitchen. Each step felt like a rebellion against the voice in my head that sounded too much like Ethan, whispering that I'd fail, that I'd always be just a waitress. But with every note I wrote, that voice grew quieter. Still, doubt lingered. What if I wasn't ready? What if I poured everything into this and it crumbled? Confronting Ethan and Lily, reclaiming my worth, it sounded empowering. But the thought of facing them, of standing tall in front of their judgment, made my stomach twist. Could I find the courage to change my life? Or would I hesitate when it mattered most? As I closed my notebook and turned off the light, the question hung in the air, unanswered, pulling me toward a path I was only beginning to carve. The spark of resolve I'd felt that night at the Rusty Anchor had grown into a quiet fire, burning steady in my chest. I wasn't just dreaming anymore. I was building something real, something mine. But as I poured myself into plans for my restaurant, another thought kept creeping in. Sharp and insistent, Ethan and Lily needed to see me rise. Not just succeed, but soar beyond their expectations, beyond their cruel words. It wasn't enough to prove them wrong. I wanted them to feel the weight of their mistake. I wanted revenge, and I was going to plan it with the same precision I was putting into my dream. I started small, practical. My notebook, once filled with scattered recipes, became a blueprint. I mapped out every step, securing a small business loan, finding a location, designing a menu that felt like me, warm, honest, comforting. I spent late nights at my kitchen table, surrounded by coffee mugs and crumpled napkins, researching local real estate and sketching layouts for a cozy dining space. I wanted a place that felt like home, with mismatched wooden tables, soft lighting, and food that told a story. I settled on a name, Kathy's Haven. It wasn't just a restaurant. It was a declaration that I was claiming my space in the world. But the other half of my plan, the part that kept me awake long after I'd closed my laptop, was about Ethan and Lily. I didn't want to just open a restaurant, I wanted it to be undeniable, a success so loud they couldn't ignore it. I imagined their faces, Ethan's smirk fading, Lily's laughter catching in her throat, when they saw what I'd built. I started tracking their lives, not obsessively, but enough to know where they'd be. Ethan was climbing the corporate ladder, always posting about his big wins on social media. Lily was tagging along, playing the part of the perfect girlfriend in his polished world. I knew they frequented upscale restaurants, the kind of places that got featured on TV. That's when the idea hit me. Gordon Ramsay, his show, Kitchen Nightmares, was a long shot, but if I could get my restaurant noticed, get it on his radar, it would be the kind of spotlight that would burn their dismissal to ash. I started networking. Reaching out to local food bloggers, pitching my vision to anyone who'd listen. I worked extra shifts to save every penny, cutting corners on my own life to fund this dream. Every decision was calculated. The location had to be central, the menu had to stand out, and my story had to be compelling enough to catch attention. I wasn't just building a restaurant, I was crafting a moment, one where Ethan and Lily would have to face the woman they'd underestimated. But as my plan took shape, a shadow of doubt lingered. Would this victory taste as sweet as I imagined? Would seeing their shock heal the scars they'd left, or would it leave me hollow? As I finalized the loan application and scouted a crumbling storefront that felt like possibility, the question gnawed at me: would I feel victorious when this was over? Or would the consequences leave me feeling empty? The day I opened Kathy's Haven, my heart was a tangle of nerves and defiance. The old storefront I'd poured every dime and dream into had transformed. Wooden tables gleamed under soft lights. The air carried the scent of fresh rosemary and roasted garlic, and my menu, filled with dishes I'd perfected over years, told the story of who I was. But as proud as I was, this wasn't just about the restaurant. This was about Ethan and Lily, about making them see the woman they'd dismissed. My plan had been meticulous, and now it was time to execute the part I'd been building toward. The confrontation. It had taken months of grinding, securing the loan, renovating the space, hiring a small but passionate team. I'd also worked my connections, pitching my story to food bloggers and local critics until one mentioned me to a producer for Kitchen Nightmares. Against all odds, they'd bitten. Gordon Ramsay was coming to review Kathy's Haven, not to fix a failing restaurant, but to feature a new one with a story worth telling. The cameras, the crew, the buzz, it was all happening tonight, and I'd made sure Ethan and Lily would be there. I'd seen their names on a reservation list at a nearby upscale spot and accidentally let it slip through a mutual friend. That my opening night was unmissable. I knew they wouldn't resist the chance to gawk, maybe even to mock me again. As the dinner rush began, I spotted them slipping in, Ethan in his crisp suit, Lily on his arm, her eyes scanning the room with that same glint I remembered from the rusty anchor. My pulse quickened, but I kept my focus, moving between the kitchen and the dining area, ensuring every plate was perfect. When Gordon Ramsay arrived, the energy shifted. His presence was electric, his voice booming as he tasted my braised short ribs and creamy polenta, nodding with approval. The cameras caught every moment, and I could feel Ethan and Lily watching, their table just a few feet away. Then it happened. Gordon called me out to the dining room, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Catherine White," he said, "this place, this food eats got soul. You've got something special here." The room erupted in applause, but my eyes locked on Ethan and Lily. His smirk was gone, replaced by a tight-lipped stare. Lily's face was unreadable, her fingers twisting the stem of her wine glass. I didn't gloat or confront them directly. I didn't need to. Their silence, their stunned expressions, said it all. I'd done what they thought I never could. As the night wound down, Gordon pulled me aside, praising my grit, my vision. The cameras left, the diners trickled out, and I stood in my restaurant, heart pounding. I'd won, hadn't I? I'd shown them. But as I wiped down a table, the thrill faded, replaced by a quiet unease. Would this moment, their shock, my triumph, really heal the hurt they'd caused? Or would it leave me questioning everything? The answer wasn't clear, and that uncertainty clung to me like the scent of the night's last dish. The high of opening night at Kathy's Haven lingered like the afterglow of a perfect dish. But it didn't last. Gordon Ramsay's praise, the applause, the stunned looks on Ethan and Lily's faces, it had felt like a victory, a moment I'd been chasing for months. Yet, as I locked the restaurant's door that night, the silence of the empty dining room pressed against me. The thrill of revenge, of proving them wrong, was supposed to fill the hollow places inside me, but instead, I felt unsteady. Like I'd climbed a mountain only to find the view wasn't what I'd expected. I went home to my tiny apartment, the adrenaline fading, and sat on my couch with a glass of wine I didn't drink. My mind replayed the night, Ethan's tight jaw, Lily's fidgeting hands, the way they'd left without a word. I'd wanted them to see me, to feel the weight of their mistake, and they had, but the satisfaction was fleeting, like a sugar rush that leaves you crashing. I kept asking myself why their shock didn't feel like enough. Why, after all my planning, did I still feel like that waitress in the stained apron, shrinking under their gazes? The next few days were a blur of running the restaurant, managing suppliers, training staff, tweaking recipes. Kathy's Haven was a hit. The Kitchen Nightmares episode aired, and reservations poured in. Customers raved about the food, the cozy vibe, the story of the woman who'd built it all from nothing. But every compliment felt like it belonged to someone else. I smiled, thanked them, and kept moving, but inside, I was wrestling with a truth I hadn't anticipated. Revenge hadn't healed me. It had only exposed the deeper wounds I'd been ignoring. I thought about Lily, how her laughter had cut me that night at the Rusty Anchor, but also how she'd once been my shadow, trailing me through our childhood, trusting me to make things right. I thought about Ethan, his cruel words, but also the moments when he'd been kind, when I'd believed he saw me. Those memories weren't all bad, and that made it harder. The betrayal wasn't just their actions, it was the way I'd let their voices drown out my own for so long. I'd built Kathy's Haven to prove a point. But now I wondered if I'd been proving it to the wrong people. Late at night, when the restaurant was quiet, I'd walk the dining room, running my fingers over the wooden tables, breathing in the faint scent of herbs and polished wood. This place was mine, a dream made real, but it wasn't enough to silence the questions. Had revenge truly mended the scars Ethan and Lily left, or was there something deeper I needed to face? As I stood in the soft glow of my restaurant, the uncertainty lingered, pulling me toward a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to confront. The questions that haunted me after opening night didn't fade easily. Kathy's Haven was thriving, tables booked weeks in advance, reviews calling my food soulful and transformative. But the victory over Ethan and Lily, the moment I'd planned so meticulously, felt like a hollow trophy. I'd built this place to prove them wrong, to silence their voices, but I was starting to see that the voice I needed to quiet most was my own, the one that still whispered I wasn't enough. One evening, as I prepped for service, I found an old photo tucked in my notebook, me and Lily, maybe 10 and 6, grinning at a county fair, cotton candy staining our fingers. I stared at it, the ache of her betrayal mixing with memories of her small hand in mine. I'd been so focused on their judgment, Ethan's smirk, Lily's laugh, that I hadn't stopped to ask why I'd let it define me. I'd given them power they didn't deserve, not because they were right, but because I'd believed they were. That realization hit like a wave, not crashing but steady, washing away the last of my anger. I started to see Kathy's Haven differently. It wasn't just a stage for revenge. It was a reflection of me, of the girl who'd learned to cook to feed her sister, who'd found joy in creating something that brought people together. Every dish, every warm corner of this place, was mine, built from years of quiet resilience. I didn't need Ethan or Lily to see that to know it was true. For the first time, I felt the weight of their words lift. Not because I'd proven them wrong, but because I'd proven myself right. I decided to reach out to Lily, not to confront her, but to understand. I sent her a simple text. "Can we talk?" She showed up at the restaurant a week later, hesitant, her eyes avoiding mine. We sat at a corner table after closing, the silence heavy between us. "I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice small. "I got caught up in his world, and I didn't know how to stop." It wasn't a full explanation, but it was enough. I didn't need her to be the sister I remembered. I just needed to let go of the hurt. I nodded, and we talked. Not like before, but like two people starting over. It wasn't perfect, but it was a step. As I locked up that night, I felt lighter. The question that had lingered, whether the past would always haunt me, had an answer now. I was ready to move forward, not because I'd erased the pain, but because I'd learned to carry it differently. Kathy's Haven wasn't just my triumph. It was my truth, a place where I could be whole. Months later, Kathy's Haven had become more than a restaurant. It was a home, not just for me but for everyone who walked through its doors. The mismatched tables were always full, the air alive with laughter and the clink of glasses. I'd hired more staff, trained a sous chef who shared my love for simple, honest food, and started hosting community nights where locals could share stories over plates of my rosemary roasted chicken. This place had become what I'd always wanted, a haven, not just for me, but for anyone who needed it. I no longer checked Ethan's social media or wondered what Lily thought of me. Their voices had faded, replaced by the hum of my own. I'd started experimenting again, tweaking recipes, dreaming up new dishes. Not for anyone else's approval but because it made me happy. One night, a critic from a national food magazine came in unannounced, and her review called Kathy's Haven a love letter to resilience. Served with every bite, I framed it, not for the praise, but as a reminder of how far I'd come. Sometimes, I'd catch my reflection in the restaurant's windows, dark hair loose, apron swapped for a chef's coat, eyes bright with purpose. I wasn't the waitress Ethan had mocked or the sister Lily had left behind. I was Catherine White, the woman who'd built something beautiful from the ashes of her pain. The scars were still there, but they were part of me, not all of me. As I stood in the dining room, one quiet evening, the last customers gone, I ran my hand over a table, feeling the grain of the wood under my fingers. This was my life now, full, messy mine. I didn't need revenge or validation to feel whole. I'd found peace, not in proving others wrong, but in proving to myself that I was enough. With a final glance at the warm, glowing room, I turned off the lights and stepped into the night, ready for whatever came next, knowing I was free.